time, and our bumper is running. PJNet Live is on the air. We are recording, we are streaming, we have a live guest, first-time guest, standing by in the green room, and our chat room's waiting. Let's start a countdown to the debut of Studio 21. Well, good evening and welcome to PJNet.TV. I'm Coach Prasick, and we are commissioning Studio 21. I think we might have used it one other time, but I'm glad to bring it back. And we've got the big screen ready for you to enjoy a good story of a Christian servant, and his name is Dale Little. I'm going to bring Dale on board here. And Dale comes to us, I think, well, I always say the Carolinas because I never can remember, but you're just in the Carolinas somewhere.
That's right. Foothills, Western North Carolina area, around Hickory.
Beautiful country, I would say.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Dale, kudos to Sunbelt Girl, Barbara, who is our associate producer. Apparently, I think you might have spoken at her church, and then she looked you up on social media.
Right.
She sent me this video where you're, strumming on a guitar and telling a little story. But your Christian walk, just given your age, you've got several seasons
Yes.
and we've only got 20 minutes. But walk us through it. Bring us up to where you're at today.
Okay. As quickly as I can. I had struggled getting settled into a ministry years ago. And anyway, we ended up operating a tax business. And I asked the Lord several times why, he had me there, because we prayed about it before we got it. But as it turned out, that's what qualified me to go to work with Prison Fellowship Ministries a few years later, and served as area director for the western half of the state for about 5.5 years, which was pretty good since I think 2 years was the average stay for director there at the time. Mm-hmm. But after I left there, I got had some horses, and I began to ask the Lord, well, how can I use these horses for your honor and your glory? And amazingly, I was able to start taking those into prisons. So
where'd you put them?
They usually have a rec yard outside, and so we did what it is, kind of took one or two horses and did an exhibition, and a lot of times took either I would speak, but most of the time I'd take an ex-inmate friend with me that would speak, mm-hmm. and we'd get the whole prison out there. Many chaplains said, well, you won't have many show up, not that many will turn out, but it's always amazing how many we had that came out to the programs, and we reached a lot of people during that time.
So let me ask you, Dale, what did the horses do, or what'd you do with the horses?
Well, they're real nice. If anyone's familiar with the Pasofino, they've got a very unique gait, and I actually built me a portable pheno strip, which is a strip of plywood that you hear the hoof beats on. It's mm-hmm. Very unique. Sounds almost like a locomotive sometimes. So it's just very musical. First horse show I ever went to that I enjoyed was seeing those horses do that. And so I ended up with a few of them, and just had a great response. As far as I know, I'm still the only person that's been able to take horses into North Carolina prisons. And that was back in early 90s to late 90s.
Okay.
After that, I started Rescue America Ministries, which is the ministry I operate now. And then we did that part under there. In other words, the horses under that ministry, mm-hmm. after I left Prison Fellowship. I tried to get Prison Fellowship interested in them, but they just weren't. But mm-hmm. At any rate, a little bit later, I ended up working in the prison system. When the economy got so bad, I said I had to have some work that was paying something. And I thought I'd be there for 5 years. At that time, North Carolina had a program where you get lifetime health benefits. And I said, well, I'll stay 5 years. And be done with it. But the economy just didn't pick up, and ended up retiring from that. And I'm beginning to ask the Lord near the end of my time. Now, I was still doing some nursing home ministry and whatever I could do just to, to keep busy with the Lord's work. But I began to ask God near retirement age. I said, well, Lord, is there going to be anything left for me? Of any significance. And by significance, I don't mean something that was important to me, but something that would really impact the kingdom. And so little did I know, shortly after, a few years after retiring at the age of 70, we were called, my wife and I, to go to Romania and work among the gypsy population there to try to start a couple of churches. And we do have a church started there now. And that's been exciting. We first got there, we were told as an atheist woman that was bringing money from Germany to this particular village, and she was building houses because they lived in shacks. I mean, we went there a year before just to check things out, and I worked on some of those. We made repairs to some of them. The roof's falling in, and it's terrible. It's just looked like something somebody throwed up for temporary shelter, but they've been there for years. And we helped on that. And but this lady was building houses, so there was a lot of concern among the other missionaries there that she might cause a problem, because she hated Christianity. She was an atheist and hated Christians and Christianity. But I said, well, if she's not greater than God, why don't we just pray about it and not worry about her unless she causes a problem later? I said, I don't feel like we need to ask her permission to go in there and do anything. But, she could cut their money off because she was also getting money for the kids. If ones of them had kids, there's lots of kids. That's what my biggest burden was. There's so many kids. But when we were there in 2017 for 2 weeks, I did an outreach and preached, and there was 3 of the Romanian women raised their hands and came to me and said they had received Christ and prayed to receive Christ. And one of those, this is how God works. One of those, when we got back to stay there for a while, the first Bible study we started was in her house, and that house was built by this atheist woman.
Oh my goodness.
So God's, I don't know where to say God's got a sense of humor, but he knows how to, undo the Satan's shenanigans. And so we're just so grateful that we got to start there. And then we did get a church started in another village. It's about 45 minutes difference, but we've had as many as 40 people there. And we had, just to give you a quick example of what we're facing, there's so little education. They are prone, and I don't mean to put them all in one category, but many of them are prone to, want to stay separate from the rest of the Romanian population. And a lot of the Romanians want it that way too. They just, a lot of, discrimination in some respects. And but this, we started this church, and there was kids, many of them started coming when we started doing the children's church. And one day there's this 16-year-old boy, and he was going to the children's church, and I started to say something, but I decided, well, I'll let the children's teacher handle it. And I'm glad I didn't say anything now, because when I went, we finished our church service, and she was still going with them. And this boy was still working in a coloring book, trying to color pictures that they'd give as one of the activities. And she had said something to him about, well, he was taking longer than the little kids. And he said, well, I've never colored a coloring book before. Mm-hmm. And then my wife was helping out with that. And one day she said they were cutting out some things with scissors after they colored the pictures, cutting them out. And one of the mothers had never used a pair of scissors to cut anything with. She didn't even know how to use them. And so it's a sad place. Some of those villages can be pretty violent sometimes. That's another problem. And that's another reason I think a lot of people don't go into them. I feel like I spent a number of years doing prison ministry. Matter of fact, a lot of years before I had to go to work, which put an end to that for a while. And that was my goal after I retired, was to try to get my prison ministry started back up. But it was just that door was closed. And after about a year, I said, okay, Lord, I said, I'm going to quit trying to push that door open and, leave it up to you. This actually started, though, with my doctor, who had his son went through medical school and decided to start a children's home over there. And he married an orphan girl, and they started children's home. And so that was kind of our connection. But I had no desire to go to the mission field, especially not Romania. If God had given me a choice, I've told many people several times I would probably pick Africa, because I'd been on a couple short-term mission trips there. But my doctor one day said, well, they had been working in the gypsy villages, and because so many of the churches didn't want anything to do with them, he said, it looks like we're going to have to build a church. And he hesitated, and I built houses for a few years. And he said, well, you could do that. Well, I didn't say, I'll pray about it, I'll think about it. I just didn't say anything. I had no interest. I just ignored it. And then just before I left, as I was going out, he said, well, if we build a church, we'll need somebody to preach. And again, just a short hesitation. He said, well, you could do that too. And again, I did not utter a word. I just had no interest. My wife was still working at the time, and I went by and took her lunch. And I was actually laughing about it. I was telling her what doctor had told me, and I was laughing about it. But when I picked lunch up the next day, I wasn't laughing about it anymore, because when I took lunch in, she said, I dreamed we went to Romania last night. Well, we didn't go because of a dream, but I did say, maybe it's time we need to start praying about this. And the more we prayed about it, the more convinced we were that's where God, wanted us to go. And like I say, I had absolutely no interest in doing that until God showed us that that's where he wanted us. And so I said a long time ago, wherever he opened the door at, that's where we'd go. And so that's what I've always tried to do. But it's been an interesting journey. And we're home right now for we finally got in. We had tried to get in 3 times about this time last year, and tickets after the COVID hit we got tickets canceled 3 times. And so finally decided just to wait. And I think maybe it's wise, because maybe, that was God's plan. That church it was very young at the time. And so we probably needed to see it getting along a little better before we left for a few months. But we'll be heading back on May the 4th, Lord willing. I lined up several doctor's visits. I do have a lot of health problems. And so it's been a task getting, the medication, diabetic. I have a rare blood disorder that predisposes me to blood clots, and asthma sometimes gets a little rough, but most of the time I'm not too bad with it. And high blood pressure, been on it since I was 29 years old, had problems. But anyway, those are just things that I trusted God to take care of, and he has. It's been strange, though. We've had teams coming over. That was the plan, was to let them bring my medications with them when they came to work. But COVID changed that. But amazingly, what I found out was that a lot of medications that we have to have a prescription for, I can go to the drugstore and get it over the counter. But when I went to get a bottle of Robitussin, they said, well, you have to have a prescription for that. So, things are different, very different.
I think you ought to have
God's
to have
been good. And I said, sometimes I said, it just seemed like we worked hard, don't get me wrong. But it seemed like almost we were just along for the ride as we watched what God was doing. And he's done it all. Just opened up opportunities for us and made those things available. And I think my prison ministry and my work as an officer and a sergeant in the prison probably prepared me a lot to work in the gypsy villages, because, like I say, they do tend to get pretty violent sometimes. They usually don't call the law to settle their differences; they handle them themselves. And so we actually had and I wouldn't call his name. We had one pastor that came and stayed for a while. And very good guy, but he had tattoos up both arms, and worked out, stayed well, good shape, and but he used his tattoos to, kind of impress, people that, Christians can, don't have to be weak and timid. But when we went out to the village one day, my friend called and said, well, he was just leaving. I said, well, it'll be about 20 minutes time he gets here. If you want to, we'll walk on down through the village. Because this pastor walked out with me, and he said, no, he said, God might have called you here, but he didn't call me. And he never moved a foot to go in and walk through. But, I've just gotten used to it. And we've done inner city work here in North Carolina before we left also. That's another thing we did. We even took courses, in some of those places when I was doing that. And down mostly in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And had a friend down there that worked with me close. And so I'm just used to dealing with things like that. I even had one friend that went with me one time in there, and he said, well, he saw where I was going. And he said, you come down here, don't you ever come down here by yourself. You call me. He said, you don't need to be coming in these areas by yourself. But, I try to be wise and not be foolish, but, I trust God, in those places. And he's always watched after me.
Well, Dale, I'm curious, and we've got about 2 minutes left.
Okay.
I've heard you say that you were in the tax preparation business or something, accounting, something like that.
Right.
I've heard you say that you were in the construction business.
Yes.
I've heard you say that you worked in the correctional industry. I shouldn't call that.
Yeah.
As a correctional officer. And I keep hearing about your mission activity, and Dale, most people just go to church.
Oh,
what
I tried that.
What drives you to get out and do these things? I mean, this isn't something that just started. This has been a pattern over your entire life. What drives you?
Mostly, like my entire life. I was saved at a young age, but I got out of God's will in my 20s, and for a couple of years, and God dealt with me, and he did some things to get my attention right quick. I worked a sawmill, and that's where I was at when he began to deal with me. And I was cutting a tree one day, and we had to idle the saw up because it had been damaged by a tree, and we had to keep it idle fast so the chain continued to go continually. You set it down to keep it running, the chain kept going. And one day I was cutting a sapling that had been pinned by a tree I'd cut, and as pressure got off of it and that sapling shot up, well, it pinched the saw, jerked it out of my hand, went up in the air. I didn't have a clue where it went, and I was afraid to look up because I knew that chain was still going. And I bent over and put my hands over my head to protect my head, and Coach, it was like somebody had gently set that chainsaw on my back. It slid off on the ground. I didn't have a scratch or a bruise. And my friend had been talking to me. We talked about just before that about guardian angels. And I said, well, yeah, I think I believe in them. Well, after that, it convinced me, and I started, God began to deal with me and get me back. And it's so many, there was there was a lot of wasted years during that time, and I felt an obligation to try to make up for that time.
I understand.
So
Well, Dale, thanks for sharing that. It's very touching, and so, I'm hard headed like you are. Okay, and yeah, thank God in His grace and His mercy and His kindness.
that's amen.
But it'd be better if we didn't let Him get our attention, if we just submitted. But a lot of us
That's exactly right.
struggle with that.
Absolutely.
But what a story! A jack of all trades, but a minister throughout, and serving in the kingdom.
Right.
Dale, what a story, man! We appreciate you sharing. We've really enjoyed it. I hope you'll visit our chat room. I think there's some nice comments in there that you might want to read.
Uh-huh.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing, brother.
Thank you, sir.
So that was what riveting. Dale Little, he didn't tell you about his guitar. Hey, look at that view atop the Eagle's Nest broadcast facilities here at pjnet.tv. As good as that was, it's going to continue. It's not over. At the bottom of the hour, J.D. Winninger will bring us to take a little tour around the Cross W Ranch, as he usually does on Thursday night about this time. So I'm going to take a little break, tear down this new studio that we're trying out tonight, and we'll bring up another one, and JD will be here. Before I leave, I would like to ask you to ask yourself two questions. The first one is, what is the boldest thing that you've ever done for Jesus Christ? And the second one is, how long ago was it? Folks, let's not wait for God to get our attention. Let's boldly go out and make disciples as we're called to do. So I hope we're not satisfied with our answer to either of those two questions.